Charlotte had no idea how drastically her life was about to change when she clocked in that morning. To her, it was just another shift at the bustling Metropolitan General Hospital. The hallways echoed with the usual sounds: doctors calling for charts, nurses shuffling from one room to the next, patients groaning in pain, and the constant beeping of monitors in every direction. Another day on the job, she thought. Until it wasn't. The emergency room doors burst open. A stretcher came flying in, paramedics surrounding it, their hands stained with blood, their voices strained with urgency. Gunshot wounds. Multiple entry points. He's critical. We need immediate assistance. One of them barked, pushing the gurney toward the trauma bay. The atmosphere in the ER shifted in an instant. A heavy silence descended, thick with unspoken fear. Charlotte's heart pounded in her chest as she caught sight of the patient on the stretcher. A man in his early 40s, his expensive white shirt soaked in crimson. His skin was ghostly pale, his breath shallow and uneven. His body was fighting to hold on, but it was obvious he was losing that battle fast. Charlotte moved instinctively, her training kicking in. She was about to reach for gloves when a cold, authoritarian voice sliced through the tension in the room. "No police clearance. No treatment," announced the hospital administrator, Mr. Vernon Hale. His face was unreadable, his arms crossed, as if he were commenting on the weather rather than condemning a man to die. Charlotte froze in place. She stared at Hale in disbelief, searching for anyone else willing to step forward, someone who might object. But her fellow nurses and doctors stood still, avoiding eye contact, their faces tight with fear. Some stepped back entirely, their hands falling away from their instruments. The rhythmic beep of the heart monitor grew erratic. He was fading. Fast. Charlotte's breathing became ragged. She knew the rules. She knew what breaking protocol meant here. She also knew she had taken an oath to save lives. Her eyes fell back on the man, his chest barely moving now. Another minute, maybe less, and he'd be gone. "Enough," she whispered, grabbing gloves and snapping them on with shaking hands. A hush fell over the ER as Charlotte pulled a tray toward her and got to work. The sharp smell of antiseptic filled her nose as she cleaned the wound, her fingers moving swiftly, precisely. Instinct and adrenaline took over as she stabilized his airway and applied pressure to stop the bleeding. "Charlotte," one nurse whispered, stepping forward, worry on her face. "You can't." "I have to," Charlotte said quietly, not looking up. The heart monitor beeped frantically, urging her on. She worked fast, suturing the wound, administering fluids, watching his vitals, stabilizing him. Gradually, the monitor began to slow into a steady rhythm. He was alive. The room was silent except for the machines. And then came the slow, deliberate sound of clapping. Charlotte turned. Hale stood by the doorway, clapping his hands with calculated sarcasm. His gaze was ice cold. "Well done, Nurse Charlotte," he said. "You saved him, but you no longer work here." Her breath caught. For a moment, she stood frozen. The sterile white walls seemed to close in on her, suffocating and unforgiving. No one spoke. No one defended her. Heads turned away. Her hands clenched into fists at her sides. But if this was the price she had to pay for saving a life, so be it. Without another word, Charlotte took off her ID badge, placed it gently on the counter, and walked out. The badge lay there, a final symbol of the life she'd left behind. Her heart pounded in her chest as she stepped into the street. She had no idea where to go next. What she didn't know was that fate had something far greater planned for her. Charlotte wandered through the city, her steps slow and heavy. The afternoon sun hung low, casting long shadows on the sidewalk. Only hours ago, she had been a nurse. Now, she was unemployed, disgraced. Her hand brushed the ID card still tucked in her pocket. She hadn't turned it in like the badge. She wasn't sure why. Maybe she wasn't ready to let go. The park offered a quiet refuge from the chaos. She sat down on a weathered bench, watching joggers pass by, listening to the distant laughter of children. She was lost in thought when a sudden cry snapped her back to the present. She shot up, her heart pounding. A crowd was gathering near another bench. As she pushed through the onlookers, she saw him. An elderly man collapsed on the ground, clutching his chest. "Call an ambulance," she shouted, already kneeling beside him. No pulse. Cardiac arrest. She didn't hesitate. Her hands laced together. She began chest compressions. 1, 2, 3, 4. Time slowed as she worked, the murmuring crowd fading to background noise. She breathed for him, compressions and breaths in steady rhythm, ignoring the burning in her arms. "Stay with me," she whispered. And then he gasped. His chest jerked. His eyes flickered open. He was alive. The crowd exhaled in relief just as the sirens wailed in the distance. Paramedics arrived quickly, taking over, but before Charlotte could slip away, a sharply dressed man approached her. He looked familiar. "My name is Adrian Lang," he said, extending a hand. "I'm Mr. Elias Roman's personal assistant. You just saved his life." Elias Roman. She blinked. Of course, the billionaire investor. The name was everywhere, but she'd been too focused to recognize him. "Please," Adrian continued, "may I have your contact information? In case Mr. Roman wishes to reach you." Without thinking, Charlotte handed him her old ID. "This will do," she murmured. He took it reverently and nodded. And that was it. She left quietly, thinking the day couldn't get any stranger. Later that night, Charlotte sat in her tiny apartment, staring at the cracked ceiling. The day replayed in her mind over and over. Fired, lost, uncertain, and yet she had no regrets. A low rumble outside her window caught her attention. Frowning, she peered through the curtain. Her breath caught. 10 luxury cars lined the street, their black exteriors gleaming under the dim streetlights. Their engines hummed like distant thunder. Neighbors peeked out from their windows, whispering. Then came a knock. Steady, confident. Charlotte opened the door slowly, finding Elias Roman himself standing on the other side. His suit was flawless, his eyes warm but sharp. "Charlotte," he greeted her. "May we come in?" Speechless, she nodded and stepped aside. Adrian followed, holding a sleek black envelope. "I don't take chances when it comes to people who saved my life," Elias said. "This is for you." Charlotte hesitated, then opened the envelope. A check for $500,000. $500,000. This is too much," she stammered. "It's not enough," Elias replied smoothly. "But it's a start." Overwhelmed, Charlotte sank onto her couch. Tears welled in her eyes, raw, uncontainable. She had lost everything. Now, she was gaining more than she had ever imagined. Before leaving, Elias handed her a card. "Dinner tomorrow. 7 o'clock. I'll send a car." And then he was gone. The following night, Charlotte found herself in a luxury vehicle, whisked through the city to an impossibly grand restaurant. She felt underdressed, but tried to ignore it. Elias was waiting in a private dining area. He smiled as she approached. Right on time. Dinner was exquisite, but Elias's focus never wavered from Charlotte. He asked her what drove her, what she wanted most in life. "To help people," she answered simply. "And you risked your job for it," he mused. "That's why you're here." She frowned. "What do you mean?" Elias explained that he owned a chain of private hospitals. For years, he had searched for someone with integrity, someone who put people above policies. "I want you to run a new medical initiative," he said. "No red tape. No bureaucracy. Just saving lives." Charlotte's breath caught. "You're offering me a hospital?" "I'm offering you a mission," he corrected. "Build a team. Set the rules." It was everything she had ever wanted. Weeks later, Charlotte stood in front of the gleaming glass entrance of the Charlotte Wells Health Initiative, saving lives without limits. Her name on the building. Her vision inside. Patients were treated without hesitation. Doctors and nurses worked freely, unchained by policy. No one was turned away. Elias stood beside her one morning, watching the busy halls. "I knew you were the right choice," he said quietly. Charlotte smiled, her heart full. More than ever. As the automatic doors closed behind her, she realized something. Sometimes losing everything is just the beginning. If you found Charlotte's story inspiring, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more true stories of courage and hope. What would you have done in Charlotte's situation? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And rate this story from 1 to 10. We'd love to hear from you.